Hi students, I hope all of you are good health. So today we will be beginning with our next revision lesson on chapter 2, that is reproduction in plant and animal, and we will be doing it in the form of discussion of various question answer so given in your book exercise. The first question is name the following. So we will be beginning our uh, video lesson with name the following part, and the first question is the process of production of new individuals from parents. Now the answer is reproduction. Now dear students, as we all know that it is one of the basic characteristics of a living organism. That means whenever we need to differentiate between a living from a non-living, we have to take this criteria as one of the major point, because if an organism needs to continue its species generation after generation, it needs to perform the process of reproduction so that they can produce their own young ones, and it helps in the process of reproduction. Next is process of production of a complete new plant from an existing plant without the use of seed. It is vegetative propagation. Now, the term vegetative means it is any part of plant which is other than flower. We all know that flower is one of the sexual unit of a plant, or it's a reproductive unit of a plant that give rise to fruit and seed, and after dispersal of the seed it give rise to new seedling. But there are some fruits like rather vegetables like potato and all which do not produce viable seed. Then how can this part of plant or this type of plant grow without the use of seed, or how can they continue their species generation after generation? Now in that case it occurs by means of vegetative propagation. Next is the process of getting back the lost body part. This is regeneration. Now students, more or less regeneration, this is a capability which is found in almost all organisms. Like we have a little bit capacity of regeneration, like whenever you get hurt or your hand or any place of the body gets cut, you will see that after few days that cut area is filled up with cells, and as a result what happens, the skin over there gets joined together. That is why we also possess a phenomena called regeneration. Other good examples of regeneration is, if you have ever noticed a lizard whose tail has fallen due to some or the other reason, after a few days or few months, the tail regrows. Again, in case of plant also, whenever a particular branch of a plant gets destroyed, the plant has the capacity to regenerate its lost part. Next is the process of transfer of pollen from anther of a flower to stigma of the same flower. Now, transfer of pollen from anther of a flower to stigma of the same flower. This means this is self-pollination. Means whenever pollination, that is transfer of pollen grain from the flower to the stigma, occurs within the same flower, it is known as self-pollination. Next is a single cell formed as a result of fusion between a male and a female gamete. Now what happens when a male and female gamete fuses together, it forms a single-celled zygote. It forms a single-celled zygote. So the answer is zygote. Next is a period of sexual maturity. Sexual maturity means when a girl or boy starts producing ova and sperm respectively. That is the male and female gamete respectively. That means they are prepared for carrying the fetus or developing a fetus. This is the period. Now this period is known as puberty. And the last one, hormones secreted by male. That is, it is testosterone. This is one of the hormone which is secreted by the male, and it helps in production of secondary sexual characteristics in male, like development of beard, mustaches, and so on. Next is, what do you mean by the term reproduction? Now, what is meant by reproduction, dear students? It is the process by which old organism give rise to new organism, and this is called reproduction. That means suppose there was an existing dog which give rise to new puppies, and after a few years we will see that the puppies are again giving rise to new puppies. That means puppies, when they grow into a dog, that is male or female dog, they are able to produce their own puppies. So this is a phenomena which is known as reproduction. That means the process by which old organism give rise to new organism is called reproduction. Next is, what do you understand by the term gamete? Okay. Gamete is a single sex cell involved in fusion during reproduction. As we have already seen that in case of female, that is in case of flower, the female part produces ovule and the male part produces pollen grain. And within that pollen grain and ovule, we get the nucleus, that is male and female nucleus, which is actually giving, so it gives rise to the male and female gamete. Next, name the male and female gamete in a flowering plant. In a flowering plant, male gamete is found within pollen grain, whereas female gamete is found within the ovule. And these are the gamete or the single sex cell that is involved in the fusion, that is fertilization, and it gives rise to a new zygote, and zygote ultimately give rise to a developing embryo. Next is, what is cross-pollination? Cross-pollination is the transfer of pollen grain from the anther of a flower to the stigma of another flower born on two different plants but of same species. That means the flower is always located in two different plants, and from there the pollen is transferred from flower of one plant to the flower of another plant, and definitely they should be of same species. That means if mango pollens falls on the stigma of apple stigma of an apple plant, then the pollen tube will not germinate, it will not result in fertilization. Whereas if the pollen of a mango falls on the stigma of a mango plant, then only fertilization can occur, that may give rise to a new zygote followed by embryo formation. So cross-pollination means transfer of pollen grains from anther of a flower to the stigma of another flower. Next is define the term fertilization. Now fertilization means it is the fusion of male and female gamete that results in formation of zygote, and this is called fertilization. So it simply means fusion of male and female gamete for formation of a zygote. Next is why is cross-pollination considered beneficial than self-pollination? Let us answer. It's simply because in case of cross-pollination, whenever the pollen from the anther of one plant, of one flower, falls on the stigma of another flower, then on fertilization, that is fusion of the male nucleus with the female nucleus, whenever the genetic material get mixed, that time the offspring so produced will possess character of both the parent flower. That means both the parent plant. And as a result, we can see that new varieties of offsprings are formed, which is not possible in case of self-pollination. Self-pollination always produces flower, that means plant, of same varieties. Means no new varieties are formed. Don't write new species. New species, nobody can form new species by combining two pollen grains, because species is something else category. Always write new varieties of offspring are formed, and they are healthier and environmentally adaptable. Suppose rice plant requires a lot of water, but on cross-pollination, we come to see that in self-pollination, what I was talking about, that suppose a rice plant requires a lot of water. Now, on cross-pollination between two rice plants, we get a new variety of rice plant. Rather, we can get a new variety of rice plant where it will require less amount of water. That means during drought condition or hot weather, that rice can easily adapt the environment and can produce viable grains. Okay, that is why cross-pollination is always considered beneficial than self-pollination. Next is, how does amoeba and paramoecium reproduce? Amoeba and paramoecium generally reproduces asexually by binary fission. Now, what is binary fission, students? Binary fission means where one cell divides. First, the cytoplasm divides, followed by the nucleus. And on division of one cell, it gives rise to two daughter cells. The same phenomena which occurs in amoeba and paramoecium is known as binary fission. But during unfavorable condition means like extreme of temperatures or chemicals that may destroy amoeba and paramoecium. What happens? They forms a cyst around them. And after forming cyst, within cyst, the amoeba undergoes or paramoecium undergoes a multiple number of binary fission, and it results in development of many daughter cells. Like in binary fission, two daughter cells are produced, but in case of multiple fission, a large number of daughter cells can be produced, and this condition is known as multiple fission. Next is, what is meant by vegetative reproduction? Now, vegetative propagation is the propagation where a complete new plant can be produced from an existing plant without the use of seeds. Very important point, without the use of seed. We generally know that seeds are usually used to give rise to new plants. But over here, I said that some plants are there which do not produce viable seed. And in that case, plants need to develop from vegetative parts like leaf, stem, root. Okay? And that case, it is known as vegetative propagation. Next is differentiate between sperm and ovum. Now we already know that sperm is the reproductive cell or reproductive unit in human male, and ovum is the reproductive cell or reproductive unit in human female. Now sperm, they are motile since they possess a tail. Now tail helps them to move or swim all through the female reproductive tract so that they can reach the ovum. Now ovum, it always remains in the female reproductive tract in the place where they were produced, or they were picked up, like they are produced in the ovary but it was picked up in the oviduct. Now from oviduct it will not move on its own, that is why they are non-motile. Now sperm, they have head, neck, tail, whereas ovum, they are generally round in structure. That means they do not have any other structures. Okay. Next, sperm, they are produced in the testes, whereas ovum, they are produced in the ovaries. Next is what is meant by parthenogenesis. Now, parthenogenesis, it is the process by which an egg develops into an adult without being fertilized. Now, fertilization means, as I have already told you students, it is the fusion of male and female gamete to produce the offspring. But over here, parthenogenesis is something else where the female lays the egg and it directly develops into a living organism. And this phenomena is seen in case of ant, honeybee. Like in ant, if the female is laying an unfertilized egg, then it gives rise to a male ant. And if the egg is fertilized, then it will give rise to a female ant. Similarly, in case of honeybee, when it gives rise to an unfertilized egg, that develops into a male honeybee. And whenever the egg is fertilized, that time it gives rise to a female honeybee. And this phenomena is known as parthenogenesis. Okay. Next is, what is artificial pollination? It is the process of transferring pollen grain from the stamen of one plant to the stigma of a pistil of another flower, and it is done manually. Now what happens? Always cross-pollination do not bring about the characters which are desired in the offspring. So in order to get the desired characteristics in offspring, what happens? Generally farmers or technical experts, what they do, they simply take up the pollen grain from the male and they simply spread it on the stigma of a female flower, that is pistil. And this is generally done manually with the help of hands or with the help of any other instrument, but human being, they do on it on their own. And as it is done artificially to get the desired characteristics in the flower, in the offspring, therefore it is known as artificial pollination. Next is, what is the optimum temperature of scrotum in male reproductive system for production of sperm? Now, sperm are male reproductive units or the sex cells or the gamete. What happens? They require a temperature which is generally cooler than the body, rather 1 to 2 degrees Celsius cooler than the body temperature. Now, how this is possible? This is possible if the testes is located in a scrotal sac just outside the human body. And whenever it is located just outside the human body, that time it helps in production of the sperm at an optimum temperature, which is about 1 to 3 degrees Celsius less than the body temperature. And if this does not occur, in that case, sperms will be killed due to high temperature or temperature beyond the optimum level, and it will result in sterility in male. That is why optimum temperature of scrotum is 1 to 3 degrees Celsius lower than the body temperature. That is why the testis is generally located outside the body in order to provide the optimum temperature for the sperms. Next is, what is the difference between self and cross pollination? Now in self pollination, what happens? The pollen grains are transferred from the anther to the stigma of the same flower or different flower on the same plant. Whereas in case of cross-pollination, it is the transfer of pollen grain from the anther to the stigma of different flower born on different plant but on the same species. That means species has to be same. This is cross-pollination. Now, self-pollination generally do not require any external agent, whereas cross-pollination requires external agent which may be living or may not be living. Living like insect, bird, then butterfly, then bat, and so on. Even sometimes elephant can also help in pollination. Yes, this is an amazing fact, but if you have heard about the name of the largest flower, Rafflesia, now Rafflesia is pollinated whenever elephant just walks over the flower, and what happens? The pollen grains stick on the foot of elephant, and when it passes through another flower, that time pollination occurs. Next, self-pollination do not cause any variation in offspring. That means the offspring character will be same as that of the parent plant. Whereas in cross-pollination, due to mixing of the characters, by mixing of the genetic material of the two parents, the offspring so produced will have a lot of variation in them, and they may be even healthier and environmentally adapted. Next is self-pollination is generally an economical process. Why? Because it do not have to produce an excess of color in flower, do not have to produce excess of nectar, fragrance, and so on for attracting pollinators. Whereas in case of cross-pollination, the plant has to produce a lot of, rather utilize a lot of energy in producing nectar, fragrance, Even large amount of pollen is also wasted in this case. So these are the few basic differences between self and cross pollination. Next is, what is grafting and how is it done? Now, grafting, it's a process similar to cutting. Now, what happens during cutting, students? We simply cut a piece from a parent plant. That is, we may cut a branch of a parent plant. Now, after we cut the branch from a parent plant, we simply sow it in moist soil, and after sowing in moist soil, after few days, we will see that it gives rise to new leaves, new flowers, even new branches are coming out. That means simply cutting the branch and sowing it in moist soil is enough to help in artificial vegetative propagation like cutting. But the offspring so produced will be same as that of the parent. But in grafting, this is a bit different in scenario. Though it is similar to cutting, but there is a bit hairline difference between these two processes. That is, generally the cut part of the plant is attached or grafted on another plant. And for this reason, what happens? The plant so produced by this phenomena generally bears both the characters of the parent. In this case, the detached stem part is called the scion, and the part of plant where cut part is attached is called the stalk. And it is done in the following ways. Now, what is stalk and what is scion? Scion is the part which is cut from a parent plant, like it may be a branch. And stalk is that part on which this scion will be grafted. It is done in the following way. Generally, a stalk is chosen for good root and resistant to disease. And scion is chosen for good flower and fruit. Okay? For this reason, these two parts are chosen. Next, scion is attached to the stalk. And what happens? The part where, rather the joining part of the stalk and scion, we just pour wax on that particular part and we just wrap it with the help of a bandage or cotton cloth. So that the cells of from that cut part or attached part, or rather the joining part, do not get dehydrated and die. Now after few days we will see, due to cell division in the cambium of stalk and scion, the two stems join together and grow as one plant. Now after a few months or few days, or rather few years, we will see that the new plant combines the best quality of both the parent plant. The upper part, that is scion, becomes the upper part to produce flower and fruit, and the scion produces new roots. And this is how the grafting process is done. This is mainly seen in case of 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 mango, where we see mango combines the various qualities of different parent plant, and we get the grafted plant. Often you will see that in a small plant, a large number of mango are being hold or it grows. How it occurs? Within such a small span of time, this occurs due to the process of grafting. Next is, what is meant by layering and how does it differ from grafting? Layering is the development of roots on a stem while it is still attached to the parent plant, which is known as a layer. Now what happens? We simply bring down a branch from the parent plant and sown it on the soil. When new adventitious roots come out from the sown part into the soil, that means it becomes independent. That means it is able to pick up water and minerals so required for preparing its food. That time this branch is cut from the mother plant, and this way a new plant developed from the parent plant. That means layering means simply it is the attachment of a stem from the mother plant having node and internode and placed in the moist soil from where new plants are produced. Okay, this way it is done, and in this method it remains still attached to the mother plant for getting various nutritions. Now what is the basic difference between layering and cutting? In layering, a branch from the mother plant is bent down to soil for development of adventitious root. As soon as the root grows, the new plant is detached from the mother plant. Similarly, in case of cutting, in this method, a suitable length of stem is taken from the mother plant, having node and internode, and is placed in moist soil from where new plants are produced. In case of layering, the branch which is acting as a layer over here means which is later giving rise to a new plant remains attached to the mother plant until the new roots develop. But in case of cutting, it remains detached from the mother plant. And since in case of layering, it remains attached to the mother plant, therefore chances of survival increases. That means during adverse condition also, it gets nourishment from the mother plant. Whereas in case of cutting, since it is not attached to the mother plant anymore, therefore chances of survival is lesser over here. Next, let us learn about choose the odd one out and give the category of the rest. The first one, cutting, layering, fragmentation, grafting. Now students, you see, cutting is a artificial vegetative propagation. Layering is also artificial vegetative propagation. Grafting, it is also an artificial vegetative propagation. Whereas fragmentation, it's a type of asexual reproduction. So over here, the odd one out is fragmentation. And category of the rest is artificial vegetative propagation. Next is stigma, anther, style, ovary. Which one is the odd one out? It is anther. Why? Stigma, style, ovary, these are parts of pistil or gynoecium of a flower. Whereas stamen, anther, it is part of the stamen, that is the male reproductive part of a flower. Next is ovaries, oviduct, epididymis, cervix. Now the odd one out is epididymis. Why? Because ovary, oviduct and cervix, it is part of female reproductive system, whereas epididymis, it's a part of male reproductive system which helps in temporary storage and maturation of the sperm. Next is binary fission, tissue culture, budding, regeneration. Now, binary fission, it's a type of asexual reproduction. Budding, it's a type of asexual reproduction. Regeneration also same. But tissue culture, it is again an artificial method of reproduction, rather production of a new plant. And it is generally carried out in laboratory. That is why the odd one out is tissue culture over here. And what is the reason? Others are asexual reproduction. Next is amoeba, earthworm, tapeworm, leech. Which one is the odd one out? Amoeba. Why? Because earthworm, tapeworm and leech all are hermaphrodite. And what is the meaning of hermaphrodite? That means it carries both the male and female reproductive organ together. Thus, it can produce both the male and female sex cells or the gamete cells. Next is infancy, childhood, adolescence, puberty. Now, infancy, childhood, adolescence, all these are phases of our life cycle. That means it includes all the aspects of life, that is social, sociological, physiological, physical, mental, everything. But puberty, it is a part of our life cycle during which the reproductive system gets mature. That is why puberty is the odd one out over here and rest are phases of life, because puberty only includes the reproductive aspect, whereas infancy, childhood, adolescence, it includes all the aspect of life. Next is testosterone, insulin, estrogen and progesterone. Now, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone all are sex hormone in male and female that influences both the primary and secondary sexual characteristics. And what is the meaning of that? Primary means in case of male it produces sperm and in case of female it produces ovum. And secondary sexual characteristics means in male it is development of beard and mustaches, and in case of female it is development of the breast, enlargement of the pelvic girdle. So the odd one out is insulin. Next, we need to arrange the following events in sequentially. Okay. First is parturition, gestation, fertilization, implantation. And how we are going to arrange it? First is fertilization. Why? During this time, the male and female gamete get fused. Then after fusion and zygote formation, the embryo gets implanted on the wall of uterus. And then the period of development is known as the gestation, followed by the delivery of the child outside, which is known as parturition. Next is pollen grain falls from anther on the stigma of the same species, formation of pollen tube, syngamy, zygote, fusion of male and female gamete, reaches the ovule. So what will be the correct sequence? Pollen grains falls on the stigma of the same species, formation of pollen tube, it reaches the ovule, and after fusion of male and female gamete, it produces a process known as syngamy and results in the production of zygote. That means the entire process of fertilization in plant has to be sequentially arranged over here. So first you need to identify what is to be arranged over here, students. Next is epididymis, scrotum, testicles, urethra, vas deferens. So if we see properly, we will see what scrotum is located outside. Within scrotum we get testicles. From testicles comes out epididymis, and from epididymis we get the vas deferens, and it leads to outside, which is known as urethra. So this is the sequence of a pathway for transportation of sperm. So first you need to learn and understand and analyze that what is the sequence given over here, and then you need to put it logically in an orderly manner. So I hope students, all of you have understood today's discussion. Please go through the video lesson and prepare this chapter well. And if you have any doubt, any queries, you can ask me in our next video Google Meet session. Thank you so much, students. Have a nice day.